10 fantasy football lessons that apply to business too. So fantasy football is a widely popular activity around the start of the NFL season. Every time the summer starts to turn to fall, men all over the country, and some women too, get really excited about the idea of drafting their new team, what sort of players are they going to have, and what is going to be their fate of their fantasy football team. Unfortunately, that's about as close as real football any of us will ever get on a professional level, but that's okay. It still is a heck of a lot of fun, and everybody likes to be able to go through the draft and have their, brags and their arguments about who's the better player and who's going to perform better and what team is going to win and all these other things. And so it's a lot of fun, and it gives everybody an outlet where they can do something competitive that doesn't require any sort of athleticism whatsoever. So in that way, it's really fantastic. But, behind the scenes, there's actually a skill set that's involved in being good at fantasy football. There's actually a number of ideas and rules and things that, as we start to do it beyond a recreational pursuit, and we start to really understand and dig deep into figuring out how we can actually win and be successful, there's actually a pretty wide range of skills that are required to be good at it. And there's also a learning curve with elements of it that give us lessons that we can learn and then apply even if we own a real business as well, because a lot of the things translate really, really well across both of those activities. There are several valuable lessons that we can take from our experience with fantasy football and apply them to business. And no, the fact that we're going to end up at the bottom isn't necessarily one of them. I don't like losing my league, but, it's a reality. It does happen sometimes. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But here are the key insights that we can really draw from the game and we can apply to our own business. The first one is to trust our instincts. In both fantasy football and in business, it's really important to sometimes go with our instincts. Now, the challenge is knowing when it's smart to go with our instincts and when it's smart to go against them. And oftentimes what happens is if we do something and we go against our instinct, then if it doesn't work out, we feel really bad because we had the right instinct in the first place. If we go against our instinct and it works, we might forget that we originally had the opposite instinct because it worked. So it's sort of an unfair bias there, but the fact of the matter is it still exists. And particularly in the fantasy football, especially with drafts and when we're starting players, in a draft, we may find a player is, we think, far better and undervalued, but all of the experts and all the statistics and all the draft charts are telling us that this person should last another couple rounds because they aren't really that good. And the worst thing is if we pass on them because our instinct was to take them, only to have somebody else get them and then find out that the person turns in to be a stud. So that is one of the real challenges and one of the things that makes it difficult, because we don't know, we don't want to overdraft and overpay for our players. At the same time, we don't want to miss out on the players we think that can be real difference makers. So that can be a real challenge. And the same situation applies to setting our weekly lineups. When we go into setting a lineup, sometimes when we don't have a lot of great players, it's actually an advantage because there aren't a lot of decisions to make. If the difference between our top tight end and our backup tight end is night and day, the odds are always going to be to go with the top guy, even though occasionally he might get outperformed. It becomes a little trickier and a little bit more difficult to go on instinct when it comes down to two players that are more similar in skill set or production, because then we might not know which way to go. And sometimes we want to lean in and instead of going the other way. I remember an instance in fantasy football where I had Jeff Garcia, the backup for San Francisco 49ers, and he was the starting quarterback, and I had Peyton Manning. And I had already qualified for the playoffs, so one of my buddies needed me to beat the opponent I was going against so he could get into the playoffs too. And I told him, well, the matchup on paper this week Manning doesn't have a good matchup, and he's already qualified for the playoffs. So I don't think he's probably going to play much, and he's probably not going to score a lot. I'm going to put in Garcia. He needs to win. He's playing for his job, and they were playing, I think, the Bears at the time, who were a really bad defense. So I said, I think the odds here are really good that he's gonna kill it. Oh, no, you gotta, the game doesn't matter to you. Put in Manning, you gotta go with Manning. So I went against my instinct. I put in Peyton Manning. He threw 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. Jeff Garcia had 4 touchdowns. I lost by about 15 points. If I had played Garcia, I would have won. He got knocked out of the playoffs, and worse, I went against my instinct. 2 weeks later, that same guy knocked me out of the playoffs, which we would have been able to eliminate him had I played the right way and gone with my instincts. So I learned the hard way with the frying pan over the forehead. Hopefully that's a lesson that you're able to learn without the pain associated with it. So I think it's really important so we don't miss opportunities. And the same goes in business. There are going to be some things in business where we see a particular opportunity, and maybe it isn't obvious on paper, and maybe it isn't something that we're being advised to go for by other people. But our instincts are usually what they are because of the fact that we have our frame of reference, our experience, our knowledge, and our abilities. And there's usually a reason if we have an instinct. Will they always be right? Probably not. But if the risk-reward ratio is such that it makes sense, we want to follow our instincts whenever possible, because usually our instincts are going to steer us right. We at least want to take really careful thought before we go against our instincts or neglect something, only to find out we wish that we had taken advantage of it. Second thing is strategic spending and investment. In fantasy football, we either get X number of draft picks, sometimes we get fantasy draft dollars or free agent dollars that we can spend, and we have to decide where we want to spend those. We have to decide where we want to draft people relative to the picks that we've got, because we might really want somebody, but if we draft them too high, all the other good players are off the board by the time we get to the next guy that we need. And if we have free agent dollars and we go and we spend too many on a player that we get excited about because they had one good performance, sometimes they turn out to be a dud, and we've wasted too much and some gems appear later. So it's all sort of a guessing game, and it's really difficult and challenging to figure out exactly where we want to allocate those resources. And business is obviously very much the same. We have limited budgets on what we can spend things on. We have a lot of things we need to spend on. So the question becomes, where do we spend the money? Where do we put what resources and what tools and what campaigns do we put our money into in order to be able to generate more than what we spent, so that way we can grow, expand, and have more to reinvest. And if we invest it in the right places, then we can be successful, and that can really work. And if we invest in the wrong places, it can cost us, and then we don't have anything left to be able to invest. And so it's super important to be able to invest wisely and make sure that we do it in ways where we're taking calculated risks and gambles. Look, every element of business has some inherent risk in it. So there's no such thing as a sure bet in terms of anything we're allocating resources to. At the same time, we can stack the odds in our favor if we do our due diligence and we know that, hey, this has a likelihood of more than paying for itself. This is a good investment. This is a real long shot, and even if it works out, it's only going to make our money back. We probably don't want to go that route. So we have to make calculated moves, and we have to consider both the short-term implications and the long-term, because both are going to have an impact in terms of whether or not we make the decision and on what decision we make. The third element is market research and competitive awareness. When we prepare for a fantasy football draft, it's kind of funny because you'd almost think like we're actually drafting real players for a real NFL team. Some guys print out sheet after sheet of all these documents, and it's an encyclopedia worth of information about every pass a quarterback's thrown and how they do in various types of weather, compare that to the schedule and how many bad weather games they're going to have, all of these other kinds of things. Other people take a little bit less, stake in the idea of all the pure research and go more on a gut feel or more on sort of players they like, or just think in general the team is going to be really good, so they're likely to be effective. And so understanding how we can look at that competitive landscape, we have to look at all of those different things. If we were going to draft a running back, we have to consider not just how good the running back is, but how good is the team. Are they going to be able to block for him? Do they have a good offensive line that's going to be able to block for this running back? How good is the quarterback? How good are the receivers? Are they going to have a passing game? If they have a passing game that's good, it benefits the running back because the defense has to play against the pass and the run. But if the passing game's too good, they may not want to actually run the ball very much. The other issue is, do they have a scrambling quarterback? If they have a scrambling quarterback, a lot of the goal line touches might be stolen by the quarterback running it in with sneaks for touchdowns, as opposed to handing it off to the running back. So all of these things we need to look at when we consider beyond just the pure ability of the actual athlete or positional player that we're drafting. And so that's going to be vitally important. And we also do need to look at their strength of schedule. If this is a team that's going to play 12 of the top playoff teams from last year on their schedule, that's a really difficult schedule, particularly if they're really good defenses. If they're going to be playing from behind a lot, they may not be running the ball much. So these are all things we need to consider. If you're playing against teams with really weak defenses, then that can be a real advantage. But there's also a level of analysis that can be too much. We can get to a point where we overanalyze, to a point where it becomes paralyzing, or we start digging into minutia that ultimately doesn't really matter. Now, when it comes to business, it's exactly the same thing. We want to make sure that we're making informed decisions that are based on really important data and knowledge. At the same time, we also don't want to overdo it. We don't want to spend so much time in analysis that either we missed the opportunity or it just doesn't matter. We're getting to a level of granularity where we're parsing hairs. So we need to really figure out, listen, what are the implications of a good decision versus a bad decision with this? And then, what are the costs and what are the rewards associated with it? And then decide how much to invest in terms of time and energy for the research. But it's always important to do a little bit of background, a little bit of research, just so we're making decisions in full knowledge and understanding that we're likely to make decisions that are informed and not realize later that we made a mistake because we didn't do a little bit of research or a little bit of background. The fourth thing is coaching and mentorship. I mean, this is massive in pretty much every walk of life. But in fantasy football, it's exactly the same. I know when I was first learning how to play fantasy football, I didn't have a coach, but I played with other guys, and some of them seemed to be really good. I was up and down, but I got into a league with another guy, and we were friends, and we started talking, and he started talking to me about some of his strategies for drafting, for picking up free agents, and it was amazing to me because I was looking at points they scored. And sometimes somebody would score a lot of points on very few touches. So they weren't going to get a lot of opportunities, they just happened to make the most of them. And he was looking more at the number of opportunities. Well, look, this guy didn't score a lot of points, but he had a lot of targets. So they are getting him the ball a lot. The odds are, over time, that person's going to produce more. So if I have to pick somebody, if I pick the one guy with two passes all game, sure, he could go for 2 touchdowns and score 15 points, or he could get 0 catches and 0 points. The guy who's going to get 7 passes or 8 passes thrown to him is likely to at least catch a few. He might get in the end zone and have a big day, but at a minimum, he's probably going to score 3-4 points, make a few catches. And that was something that I actually learned because I was talking with somebody else. And so while he wasn't officially a coach or a mentor, he was actually a competitor, I got that strategy from him. And I learned exactly how to build my roster around that and how to target free agents. And in business, a lot of that is very, very similar. Right? We want to find someone who's really good at stuff that we've done or stuff that we want to do, so that way we can go and we can either model them if they aren't somebody that we know personally. We want to sort of mimic what they're doing so we can get similar results, or we want to go and get guidance from them if we can. If we can get them to be an actual mentor, if we can get them to be our actual coach, that's even better, because that means they're going to work with us firsthand and we're going to get adjustments in real time. We're going to get advice in real time instead of anecdotally trying to figure out, okay, this is what they did, how do I retrofit that to my situation, which is a little bit different, and on and on. And so there's a lot of value in mentorship. There's a lot of value in coaching, and it can apply in both fields really, really well. The fifth thing is to identify sleepers. That's a fantasy football term that everybody knows, but maybe not in business, right? It's an undervalued player that has the potential to really break out and have a fantastic season and score a lot of points, but we get them for a very low draft pick or as a free agent because most people overlook what their potential contribution is. When there's a top flight player, everybody knows, Jamar Chase is going to get drafted right away, Justin Jefferson, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, because everybody knows what to expect from them. And even if they have a down year, they're likely to still do reasonably well as long as they're not injured. But there are guys that might be expected to do very little that break out and do really, really well, and this does happen sometimes. And so if we're the ones who are lucky enough to catch them, and we get them for a low draft pick in addition to all of our bankable stars, now we've got something we can build on and maybe win a league. In business, it's a similar idea. We want to identify undervalued opportunities, right, or emerging markets. Anywhere there might be an opportunity or a market that we can take advantage of that other people might overlook or not see coming is a great opportunity to jump in and take advantage of, because we might be able to get a massive return on our investment before it gets overcrowded and overrun with competition. So that is a very valuable element of it, is looking for those sleepers in our business, and we do that by keeping our eyes open to opportunity. The sixth lesson is adaptability and reevaluation. We always need to be able to reassess. In fantasy football, what happens? We play a week and we find out, oh no, this particular guy got injured. Now what do? The guy that we thought was going to be our answer at this particular position is now out for a month or out for the season. So we have to pivot. We can slide our backup in there, but if they aren't very good or high scoring, that might not be enough to be able to help us win our league. We might need to make a decision. Do we want to make a trade? Do we trade off a draft pick? Maybe we have multiple guys at one position that are really strong, but we can't field them all at the same time. So maybe we trade one of them off to somebody else who has a need there, and we get somebody back who can replace our injured player. There's a lot of different strategies that need to be reassessed. We need to reassess each week the various opponents. You have somebody who's a kicker, and he's really good, but he's going to be, kicking into 50-mile-an-hour winds this weekend. Maybe you take a guy who isn't necessarily as good a kicker, but has really playing in a dome, has much better conditions, so your odds are better off in that particular way. So we have to reassess our strategies. We have to be willing to adapt. That's absolutely crucial. And in business nowadays, it's really crucial because the only constant is change, and it's only getting faster. The speed of change is actually increasing. And so it makes it even more important to be adaptable. The last thing we want to be is stagnant, stuck in our ways, and rigid about change. What we want to be is adaptable, nimble, flexible. So as we see opportunities and threats, we can pivot. As we see opportunities, as we see technology evolving and different, places where we can get leverage, we want to be able to take advantage of that stuff. And we want to be able to avoid competitive issues that put us in a bad spot. And so we have to always evaluate our performance. We have to always make necessary adjustments, not only based on our own situation, but as the market as a whole, as the economy as a whole, and just as the changing consumer tastes as a whole. The seventh parallel is continuous improvement. Fantasy football landscape, we all have a good year, bad year, whatever. The idea is we want to try to constantly get better and better and better. We want to learn from our mistakes. We want to learn from the things that we did wrong and, learn from that so the next time we don't make the same mistakes. And in business, it's exactly the same thing. We're going to make mistakes. That's just part of the deal. And it's going to be constant that that's going to happen. But if we embrace a mindset of continuous improvement, we worry less about that. And we worry more about just getting better and better and better at every single thing that we do. If we regularly assess and refine our strategies, we're going to keep getting better. And it's phenomenal. If we had a 1% improvement in four or five different activities every single day or every week over the course of a month or a year, the net effect is actually astounding. And it's a very small incremental change or improvement each time. but that is how powerful it is. And so it's the mindset of doing it continuously that really matters to keep us competitive, keep us ahead of the game, and keep us responsive to customer needs. The eighth element is risk management, right? We have to weigh our risk, because we have to sometimes start proving players or make trades, and that stuff can backfire. I've seen people in a trade situation where it was a no-brainer, but they were so petrified about giving up this one player that had all this promise, even though they hadn't produced much, that they held on to him in hopes that they would explode next year, in the keeper league. And, we can do that, but sometimes we sacrifice this year for next year, and then it doesn't work out anyway. In business, it's the same thing. We have to understand and manage risk, because the risk is all around us. So we have to weigh the potential risks and rewards in every single thing that we're doing, every decision we make that's big, because that's going to be the difference between success and failure. It's okay to take risks, but we need to be able to do that when we know that we can maximize our potential for gain and minimize our potential for loss. The ninth thing is team collaboration. In order to have success in fantasy football, a little bit of collaboration, a little bit of communication, because we need to get to a point where we can negotiate with all the other people that are in our league, so we can do trades, we can do strategies, we can implement new rules in our league, and make it fair for everybody, and make it a situation where everybody's happy and has an equal chance. In the business world, we want to foster collaborative environments whenever we can, because that enhances creativity and problem solving. When we work together as a team, with colleagues, with partners, with people on our team and in our staff, open communication can lead to more innovative solutions and a stronger organizational culture. And the 10th element is data-driven decisions, right? Fantasy football relies a lot on statistics and data analysis. And what happens this year isn't necessarily correlated to what happened last year, but at least it gives us a clue. It gives us an idea. It gives us something we can use to predict. And that's how we can make decisions about player selections and trades. In business, it's exactly the same thing. We want to take a look at our historical data, all of our analytics, so we can use that to guide decision-making going forward. It doesn't mean the past equals the future, but we can learn from the past, analyze from the past, and make adjustments. If we analyze market trends, customer behavior, operational performance, and all that kind of stuff, then we can make more informed choices that are more likely to drive growth and efficiency. So all of these lessons together highlight the parallels between fantasy football and business, and there are a lot. And it's super important to have strategic decision-making, adaptability, right? Important, research, mentorship, all these things are really valuable. So the takeaway is that taking business lessons from our leisure activities or any sphere outside of business can actually be fun, and it can make them easier to remember, and it can make them easier to implement also. So it's important to always keep some elements of fun in business, because we are going to take it seriously, of course, but we also need to be able to relax and be playful with it too at sometimes. And fantasy football is a really great escape for a lot of people, and many of the skills needed are the same ones that we need in business. So I guess you could say, who knows, right? Maybe taking first in your fantasy football league means that you're ready to dominate in business too.